Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On Air with me, Owen Richards, and of course I'm joined by Josh Smith, my co-host from CRO Connected. And we are very lucky today to be joined by Dan Brown. Dan is going to be joining us to talk about his personal journey outside of work and inside of work and how that's helped him to build strong mindset and resilience in the sales world, but also all of those learnings coming from outside of the sales world and how they translate back in. Dan, thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you on the show. How are you today, first and foremost? You in good form?
I am, yeah, feeling really good. Just to say, I didn't show up looking overly formal. Just I've got some meetings today, but thought I'd just leave the tie on for effect.
I like it. No, we're happy to have you here, tie and all. Really good to have you on the show. Look, Dan, before we get stuck in, look, Josh and I have got lots of questions for you, and we're really looking forward to picking your brains on this one. Be good if you could give our audience just a bit of a 2-minute overview on you, your background, what you're doing now, and what's led you to here to this conversation.
Yeah, no problem. So, try and condense it into like less than 2 minutes. So, for anyone who doesn't know, it's just been a long and eclectic, wild journey. So, for reasons sort of beyond my control, I ended up homeless when I was about 15. I had some people that were great in giving me an opportunity to get me into sales, and I've always been incredibly grateful for the fact that somebody would give me opportunity, not charity. And I just had a lot of just some really, really positive experiences that took me through sales, into marketing, ended up running my own events companies, went off on a very ideological journey, started a program called Doing Well, Doing Good. That was all based around having a really measurable positive impact on other people's lives. Met some wonderful people like the King's Lord Lieutenant, a guy called Sakeno Lisa. I've been working with him on Doing Well, Doing Good. And then ultimately now, I've joined an organisation called CDM Media. And the idea behind that was the things that really, really matter to me, which is about driving meaningful connection, creating really, really solid, revenue business growth for people, but also doing good at the same time. I really, really needed a global platform to stand on and to connect people on. So that led me to join CDM as their exec director for partnerships and communities. And in that, I was introduced to Josh. Did a few roundtables for your event recently, and here we are.
Brilliant. And Josh, obviously you've met Dan before now, and there's obviously something you see in Dan that around his story that you think the audience would be useful. What was it that made you think, Dan's a great guy to get on the show, and let's hear more of his story?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I knew, although this doesn't make sense, I knew Dan. I felt like before I knew, I kind of learned about him through a common friend and I guess colleague of Dan's in Amy. And she was kind of talking a lot about the do well, good work that you were doing, and was really kind of nudging at me to connect, and then we did, and we did the summit and all that stuff. It was in that process of learning about the story, that Dan's got. One, it was inspiring. 2, it was difficult, and 3, it was successful. I think it's like a really interesting kind of orchestration of all of these different things that have allowed him then to, develop the frameworks around mindset that he has. And, for me, I think like there's a lot of interesting people. There's a guy I listened to called Bill Berwick that was the head coach of the English basketball team, took him to their first Commonwealth gold back in 1992. So a little bit before I was born, but he's been like a serial quoter. Like super inspirational guy. And like one of the things he kind of said that's always stuck with me is, genetics essentially deal the cards, but environment plays the hand. And I think like when I was looking at Dan's story, it kind of felt like that to me, like environment is one of them things that are kind of driven by perspective and outlook. And irrespective of the, kind of initial card you've been dealt, you can essentially, still achieve and do good and stuff like that. So probably a really long way to say there was a multitude of different reasons. But, it was just a wildly inspiring story, I think, that, made me want to do this. So I guess then with that, through all of the different stuff into, You've rafted up the Nile. You've done all, like you said, you've been homeless. Like, was there one point within all of that stuff that you look back on and go, do you know what, that was the thing that helped me create the thing? Or is it, again, the kind of culmination of all of them?
I think, there definitely is a one thing, and I'm probably on the borders of banging on about it in the mindset of some people, but it's just such an important thing. And anything I ever talk about is only because like the guy you're speaking about there, about people who like kind of the head coach of elite performing teams. They're quite inaccessible. Like, it's hard to access those people and have a conversation. And so a lot of what I do and what I talk about is just trying to be a more accessible point of contact for anyone who just wants to kind of create this sort of mindset. But the thing that really drove it for me was the Nile. Like, there was so much that had gone on in my life before that point, and that was only 2014. So it wasn't even really that long ago. But that being out on the Nile, I'd flown out there. I was in a sorry.
No.
Okay, carry on.
Sorry. I thought I was in this zone, like, of having I had nothing, probably had too much, just kind of my mind had gone in lots of different directions. And for whatever reason at the time, I just felt like I was just at a very, very low point. And literally, I don't know really, when I think about it, I flew out there because I wanted to feel alive. Like, genuinely, I just wanted to do something. I'd always wanted to see if I could survive without a safety net. And in the back of my mind, there's always been this, could I find that trip? Could I do that? And it just so happened at the time I was offered it completely randomly, this invitation by some really extreme sports people to do this one-off. But being out there, that one single thing of being tipped upside down into one of the most dangerous rivers on the planet, knowing that they just told us, do not tip up in this thing. It gave us an immediate respect and wish to live. And I can always bring everything back to that point. And it was like a switch that went off. So yes, like that moment was fairly defining.
Yeah, I don't doubt. And I think it's like interesting as another observation when you were saying that too. It's like sometimes the kind of compound of proof, like, you put yourself in that position, ended up in a place that was high risk, dangerous, found a way to navigate it. That too, I suppose, gives you the ability to, remain now positive under difficult scenarios. But again, like we were talking before going live on this, I think it's a common story that, people who have been through hardship to some degree, end up developing the mindset that makes them successful. But it's not also required. The interesting thing about it's helping people understand that they can unlock a level of performance through the mind without actually having to do something as extreme as you have, live the life you have.
Yeah, as we were saying, I think it's just a really important point. Like, these stories, and there are lots of people that have done lots of things. And Owen, you were talking about the running and kind of ultra marathons, and there are a lot of examples of extreme things that can help develop that mindset. But ultimately, people shouldn't have to and shouldn't need to, right? And frankly, to some degree, shouldn't want to, put yourself in such an extreme situation. I think one of the things that I'm always really keen to, whether it's my kids or whether it's talking to other people, is to talk about like finding your own personal mountains to climb. Like, I think the key for me to the idea of like having a really kind of resilient mindset is, one, just knowing what really matters to you. And then in the context of knowing what matters, you can see the things that you find challenging. And it's really, I think, having this resilient mindset is just another way of saying, what are the things that I find challenging in the context of the things that really matter to me, and then just having the ability to move into them. There was a really great book called The Obstacle in the Way is the Way by a guy called Ryan Holiday. And the premise of that was that if you want to build a resilient mindset, then identify the things that give you a lot of fear. And that doesn't need to be some huge life-altering experience. Just identify the things like showing up for a marathon, or showing up for the first day at the gym, or showing up for the first day of a new job. Like, what are the things that you find uncomfortable that you then can push yourself into? And it's that process of keep doing that helps build a resilient mindset.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think there's a thing about conscious decision making as well. So if you go back to your turning over and on the Nile, you've got your emotional response, which is fight or flight, it's fear. And then you've got your conscious decision making behind that, which is, what do I need to do to get out of the situation? I can't just panic and flap around. I've actually got to do something to resolve this. And I guess it's the same everywhere else, which is that, when we're super stressed at work and we've got too much on our plate and, we're overwhelmed by all the things going on around us and we're failing at some stuff, actually logic sitting behind the emotion, it's really easy to see what the answers are. Anyone can stand out of that situation and go, well, if you just did that, why don't you put that bit to the side? This isn't as important as it feels like it is right now. It's not as urgent. Why don't you park that and come back to it in a minute and create yourself some space? All of us can see that logic from the outside, and often individually in the moment, we can still see that logic, but it's the emotions blocking us from being able to process it. And I guess what you're saying there is about making these conscious rather than emotional decisions, which is, right, how do I build resilience? I need to consciously step into some of the things that are my own mountains, and I need to be able to deal with these things that I don't have control of by using logic rather than emotion. But at the same time, what we don't want to become is robots where we block the emotion off entirely, because that's part of dealing with these things. So keen to get into your head around, how do you tap into that conscious logic side of your brain when you're under such stress or pressure, like, drowning in the Nile and you've got some crocs swimming up to come and eat you.
There's so many. I spend a lot of time, just reading. I think, in the world we live, I'll come to that point directly in a second. I suppose it's the ability to kind of just harnessing both, right? So logic is a wonderful thing until it doesn't work anymore. And that's when you have to harness all your emotion. And emotion can be a wonderful thing, but sometimes, you get to a point where you just don't. So sort of utilizing both is very powerful. What I tend to find is that there is a couple of books written about this, and I suppose it's the step before that you need to start thinking about, whether this is logic or emotion, is the ability to control your response in a situation. And I will stand by this all day long. Like, it's the simplest thing, and it's the hardest thing to do, which is, like, in any given situation, is do not react. Like, find a way to respond in a very calm and powerful manner. And the first book I ever read on this was written by a wonderful guy called Stephen Covey. And he adopted this idea about there's a gap between stimulus and response. And the more you can play in that gap, the greater control you have over your mindset. And then in any situation, you can decide whether this is a logical structure that needs to be applied, or whether actually I need to operate on emotion. And there's room for both. I think little bit later on, I learned that concept of the gap between stimulus and response was adapted from a book called Man's Search for Meaning by a guy called Viktor Frankl. And I suppose if we're talking about extreme examples that you never ever want to be in, but things that are really good to reference in order to give ourselves some perspective, like Viktor Frankl, for anyone who hasn't read the book Man's Search for Meaning, the fundamental premise of that is that he was a person living his life and ended up being taken into a concentration camp. right? And watched some of the most horrific things you could ever imagine, including his family were killed. And so, like, you can't really imagine a more extreme situation. And yet in that process, like, his ability to develop this whole concept about, in order to survive in that environment, he needed to build an entire psychological framework around controlling your emotions and how you respond to situations and how you don't react. And it's that premise that sort of built everything else, which is, and for me, I think that is the fundamental piece, which is the better you can get at sort of not reacting to a situation, and then that little middle ground and saying, what's my response? Simple, just not very easy.
Yeah. Do you know, it's funny because I want to take it back to the workplace, because that's what most people are going to want to apply this to. You do see a difference between working with somebody who is able to do that, is able to be in a difficult situation, step back from it momentarily and still respond, like you say, versus somebody who's emotion first. And I think we all enjoy and learn from people, enjoy working with and learn from people far more who are able to do that than people who respond with emotions. And that's not to say emotions don't have a place and aren't a positive thing, but it's when we choose to listen to them or be led by them versus when we choose to park them, acknowledge them, and then maybe move through to the logic or the reason or whatever it is that we choose to deal with the issue with. So I think it's a really interesting point, Dan. Thanks. Josh, I think I sort of talked over you at the beginning of that. Did you have a question?
No, it's okay. I was more saying, like, I think it's interesting, that kind of gap between stimulus and response. Like, in the context of work, the hard part, I imagine, is how do you help people develop the capability to be calm, less reactive in them scenario, right? Like, I remember the first time I ever made a cold call, and I got the first objection of like, haven't got time for you right now, whatever. And my initial response, was panic, bright red, really that process of, repeating that 100 times before you become fully comfortable, having conversations unscripted, unstructured with a human stranger. So I just guess, like, from your experience in the workplace, like, and specifically sales as the context, then, like, do organizations need to do more to help kind of battle test people in difficult scenarios so that then they don't lean into reacting either too emotionally or too logically, whatever the right answer is in that specific scenario?
Yeah, I think you've literally just picked up such a brilliant example as well about, and it sort of tied to what I was saying at the start, is pick something that makes you feel really uncomfortable. And let's say it's cold calling. Let's say you're in a job, you're going to have to do a lot of cold calling, and the thing that's going to build your resilience and your effectiveness, the reality is it's going to be doing a lot of calls and dealing with a lot of rejection and, working through that process and actually building your own ability to be able to step back, breathe, relax, not have even if you're, as we all do and we all would, we all feel, we're all human. We all have that sense of human emotion inside. But that ability to just be able to keep going at it and just say, do you know what? Breathe, I'll have another go. Breathe, I'll have another go. And the cold calling thing, I think, is probably in sales in some way everyone can relate to in some way. To answer your question about, do I think people need more support? Two things. Yes, 100%. We were dealing, that if you think about, and I'm sure we've all experienced the extremes, one extreme, you've got somebody listening in on a call, come on, and prodding and probing and pushing somebody while they're trying to learn how to cold call effectively. For me personally, that is not a supportive way to help someone build a resilient mindset or become effective. But having somebody, when you've got somebody, you're encouraging them, to kind of push in, learn more, do more, be more, learn to adapt, get uncomfortable or get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That process is made a lot easier when it's supported by people who are able to manage themselves and then be supportive to that individual. So yes, I think identifying things in the workplace, in sales, particularly like, pick something like cold calling, something that makes you uncomfortable, but you need to be effective at it. And the simple process is I need to do more of that, because that's the thing that's going to build my resilient mindset. Repetition, whether it's in the gym, whether it's picking up the phone, repetition is the thing that builds the resilience. The unfortunate situation is repetition of the wrong thing isn't either, which is why we need really helpful, experienced coaches, whether that's in the workplace, whether it's in the gym or whatever you're doing. So yeah, I absolutely believe we need to establish better ways to be supportive of people pushing out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting point too about the coaching. I always kind of relate back to a story back about 10 years ago, like my first proper corporate job, and I had this manager called Steve, and undoubtedly the best sales guy on the sales floor. Super smart guy with all the lovely suits, and always looked amazing. And obviously he could see that I was consistently nervous early doors of executing on the cold call, and he started to kind of show me really tactical things that I would watch him do first. It was not like a tell; it was a show and tell. And like that process of seeing somebody world class do the thing, and then be able to have that kind of process of osmosis where I could learn from him. It was just simple things, right? Like when he became challenged in moments on a conversation, you'd notice his posture change. You'd notice him peacocking a little bit, and all of these little things that just give you the ability to go, and it was like, I just think it's a fascinating point. And maybe, there's another conversation to say, like, how hard is it to create more of them scenarios in a remote world, and, all this stuff, but that's probably another hour or two's. One other thing I was curious, and Owen, I bet you've got some really interesting opinions on this too. You've obviously built sales teams from zero to reasonable scale and size. Like when you're hiring, there's a kind of process of how much skill do we want versus how much will do we want, and there's complexity around testing for both of them scenarios. Like, how do you both think about that in terms of net new hires? Is there a perfect cocktail or potion of this much skill, this much will? And if so, how have you found success in testing for them things?
Dan, go first, mate.
It's a good one. So we're sort of talking about, kind of how. Sorry, just give me that again, Josh. Sorry.
No, it's like but basically what I'm saying is like obviously there's like a skill and will component. Then what in terms of being good or high performance, and obviously the kind of resilient mindset is all in the kind of will bucket. I think what's hard for people when they're recruiting people is to kind of test. It's quite easy to see somebody's good, right? Put them in a scenario, let them role play. They're good. Test up front. Are these people willing to do the things required to be successful week in, week out, month in, month out? Are they just a maverick who's going to produce in moments, or are they somebody capable of doing the hard shit for an extended period of time and without there's problem? And I guess like all of our challenges when we're hiring people is trying to get a balance of this person's good enough, got the potential, the skill, the ability, but they've also got the mindset component. So I was just wondering, are there stories or things you've seen where it's like we found a good way to measure or take a bet up front as to this person's not just skill, but kind of mental capability to be good?
I wouldn't be able to speak to whether like people have found this kind of not even silver bullet, but I suppose what I would say is coming back, combining that to the point we were making a minute ago. Like people can be, people can present well, and be, really well. They can be very motivated, right? But motivation and consistency are, very, very different things. And I personally would say it comes back to this point about if you're identifying people that, you have an instinct for, what they can and should achieve. Like a lot of this is about like kind of helping them develop confidence inside your organization. So, it's a bit like, I mean, I'm not a big football fan, but if you pick like, some of the players who have like transferred for, ridiculous, huge, let's say huge sums of money, and then they've turned up at a team and they're proven, they've got a track record, for all intents and purposes, like they're epic, we were going to expect them to score a lot of goals, and they just don't, like they don't perform. And that's not that they're not motivated. It's not that they're not skilled, but in that process somewhere, something needs adjusting. And for me, I've always found this comes back to helping people build confidence inside the environment they're in. And for me, again, like confidence is the ability to have a good track record with yourself. So if you're bringing somebody into an organization, whether they're new or whether they're really experienced, helping somebody build a track record with themselves inside your organization is the thing that helps build people confidence. And then if you're confident in that environment, you'll win. And I think that applies to life as well. I talk to my kids and say, look, there's a huge difference between confidence and arrogance. Like you can have somebody arrogantly stroll into your organization, they present well, they're the best thing ever since sliced bread. But ultimately that arrogance breaks down, when people don't deliver and they're not confident in their ability to deliver. So again, helping people build confidence in themselves, in the role or in the organization, is ultimately, as far as I can see, is the best way to determine the outcomes that you're going to get from them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I look across the recruitment process, Josh, and I actually think it's a really, really genuinely valuable discussion point because it is, how do you test for it? How do you stress test somebody on the way in? And for me, it's a can they be a good fit for the environment, and do they have the resilience, the strength to deal with the negatives that come up? So going back to our earlier point of that emotional reaction, I am looking for somebody, particularly in a senior role, who doesn't lead with emotion. They need to acknowledge their emotions. They need to embrace them. They need to use them. I want them to have emotional intelligence, but I want them to be mature enough to be able to stand back from rejection, stand back from a difficult scenario, process it and deal with it in a logical, practical way. So one of the things I do, and I don't know that this is necessarily a how do you test for it? I think it's a thing that's come purely through luck based on who I am and my personality. Whenever I'm interviewing somebody, I have a policy that I'm really upfront with them with my feedback throughout the interview process. So I'm not one of those people who somebody will walk out and go, I don't know if I did well then. I don't know if they liked me. I don't know if I will tell them what I like and I'll tell them what I don't like during the conversation. And I find personally, I sort of accidentally stumbled across that being a really useful testing technique. So a direct example of that is our operations director who started in a role that's more junior than he's in now, has now become a director of the business. During the interview process, I told him why I didn't think I was going to hire him. And that wasn't because I was mind made up, but there were two things that were niggling me that I felt uncomfortable with, that I just hadn't seen enough of, or that maybe not responded in the right way, or maybe hadn't shown me enough evidence of. And so I communicated that with him, and he impressed me with the way that he handled that. He stood back, he came back, he presented his argument really logically, used data to show it, and I went, that's impressive. That's really impressive. And he's somebody who maybe didn't have all the skills that I wanted at that point in time, or hadn't demonstrated it, but showed me he'd be able to develop them. And for me, the resilience to be able to meet somebody who can make the decision as to whether you get the job that you really want or not. It's a life-changing decision. For that person to give you negative feedback directly, and the way you handle that to be the determining factor of success, for me, that's a really good way of testing. That's not to say go out and make up negatives or do it artificially. It was authentic. It was genuine. But I do think the power of feeding back to people in an interview and say, look, I really like these things. There are a couple of things that I'm concerned about. It's X and it's Y. You just haven't quite got that experience there, or I'm not so convinced around the cultural fit here, or actually you haven't really demonstrated X, Y, and Z. Will give you a hint, because if somebody gets defensive, well, that tells me they're emotionally led, right? If somebody is pragmatic, they go away and think about it, they come back with a good data-led debate or evidence-based argument as to why actually they just maybe haven't shown that, and acknowledges that, I probably didn't do the greatest job there. That shows humility. it shows logic, it shows practical thinking processes. And I think that demonstrates a good fit and the ability to take negativity on during any process, which is inevitable. So it's not, Dan, it's not silver bullet, but it's a really nice technique that you can naturally build into conversations right across the workplace.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think you probably stumbled on something that is just super smart, but it was too obvious. Like, doing something in a sales capacity and you don't give them, the famous R word rejection, just to see how they would handle that, then, you're probably not doing a good job. So I actually think that's a really smart tactical thing.
Yeah, you're probably good at it tactically as well. But you know what? This brings me back, maybe when I answer you, we talk about frameworks and we talked earlier about conscious thinking. Right? You go into a situation consciously doing something. I'm going to do X because I know that tests something, or that gives me the outcome that I want. And there's a framework for that. How important do you think it is to have a framework for how you develop your mindset and your resilience versus a trust for the organic and a trust for the process? Because, well, the more experience I get, the more resilient I'll get. And then where do you start if you do want to go down that framework route? Like where do you start?
Yeah. I just wrote a whole book on it. Just because it's like it's one of those like habits, or whatever you want to call it, like frameworks, habits and rituals. Like, but if you read anything, like and I'm like a lot of us, we spend a lot of time trying to understand, and then select the things that are like most helpful and useful. But yeah, the idea of this, I just trust the process, great. But my response to that is always like hold the vision and then adjust your process. And in that process, you need to have a framework, and that framework has to work for you. Like, what I do every day and what I've been doing for a long time, works for me. But it's whether you want to call it a framework or habits and rituals, the ability to, like I said earlier, you continually do like repetitions, whatever that is really important. Like, because you're effectively what you're doing is you're building yourself a system to catch yourself when you fall. Like, everyone fails, right? Everyone. Like, in fact, a lot of the time, if I think about it now, I'm constantly pushing to find points of failure. Because if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. It's as simple as that. Like, if you're sitting there saying, "Oh, smashed it every year on year," like you're not trying hard enough. Like, you're playing small. And the ability to manage yourself and manage rejection, it doesn't even matter whether it's sales. Like, the ability to manage yourself, to push forward, to constantly be striving to do more and be. You have to have a system. Because otherwise, well, when things go bad, and they do, you will fall to pieces. For me, like at a very high level, I always operate to this thing called operating at pace. So I have 6 monthly landing zones. Okay, so every 6 months, I go from May to November, November to May, and I have these idea of landing zones. So in each landing zone, I've got a selection of goals. And then underneath that, I've built a lot of habits and rituals and structures to make sure that when these things start to, explode, that there's always an ability, a system, a framework for me to catch myself and put myself back where I need to be. And the effectiveness of your system is based on how quickly you can get yourself back to that kind of neutral point. But pace for me is not about running around quicker and like reacting to everything that comes up. Pace is about give yourself a primary objective, make sure you've got a lot of alternative routes to meet that objective. And I think there's a big thing here about people who have often said in the past, you should only ever have one thing to focus on. No, like if you can have one primary objective, but you are going to need a lot of alternative routes, particularly in the world we live in now, to get there. So primary objective, alternative routes, contingencies, everything's going to explode. Like, the wheels are going to fall off. Like, the more you're pushing to grow, do more, be more, and like just find out how far you can go, the more things are likely to explode. So make sure you've got plenty of contingencies. And then execution, like the one thing I never wanted to hear, and the one thing most people don't want to hear: dreams, ideas mean absolutely nothing without execution. And I think it's, like being able to operate in a framework where you set really positive intention for, what am I made of? How far can I go? What can I overcome? Like, know the limit, know what you're prepared to do to achieve that primary objective, but then make sure that you've got systems, processes, frameworks that support you. Like, this isn't about, trying to control your environment. Like, it's like pushing oil uphill. Like, there's a wonderful book called Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. But, fundamental point is, like, it's all about how you manage yourself, like, and then how you apply that response to the outer world, to everything else. So habits, rituals, frameworks, whatever you want to call them, are an absolute essential part of them being able to go, well, now I'll just let it ride, because you've built the ability to do that. You're a car on rails as opposed to a blancmange waiting to move forward. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like,
not an analogy I expected to hear today, but
not one I was preparing to give. No habits, no rituals. You're a blancmange.
But it is a good point, because you see people drift, right? We naturally all drift. We change what we're doing bit by bit organically, and it's not until you consciously look back and go, I used to do this and it worked, and now I don't do it anymore. And it's because you haven't got that framework, you haven't got that process in place, whatever it is you want to call it, and you're not holding yourself accountable to it. And as you say, it's individual to you, right? It's not take somebody else's and replicate. You need to adapt and you need to adjust, and probably it will evolve as well, right? What worked for you 5 years ago probably won't work today, because you've had a different set of challenges. But it's important to be able to build structure into things, because that's how we get the best out of ourselves.
100%.
Good. Josh, any last questions for you? Is there anything we've missed? I mean, we haven't really tucked into, Dan, your homelessness early in your life, or your insane choice to run an ultra marathon starting from tomorrow, i.e., make the decision today, start it tomorrow. But I'm guessing those things maybe one wouldn't have happened without the other. I'm guessing, the idea of running an ultra marathon, you must know there's a reasonable amount of resilience and strong mindset there to take on that challenge, and more importantly, to complete it, right? Because a lot of people might choose to take it on out of ignorance, naivety, whatever, over enthusiasm, but would give up very, very quickly because they haven't got that resilience. And I'm guessing there's a link between things like your homelessness earlier in life, which obviously we would never wish on anybody, but there's a positive that comes out of that, which is that it builds that resilience and that mindset that you need to be able to get through a tough few days, which ultimately is you're safe. You can go home and have a shower, and you have got food if you need food, and so on and so forth.
It's true. It's like, just as wild or kind of maybe weird as this may sound, like when I was 20 years old, I developed this idea of having a 100-year plan. Like nobody knows how many Wednesdays you've got left. It could be, we just don't. But so for me, it was just, look, hope for the best, plan for the worst. My attitude was, at 20 years old, I can't do anything about it. Do you know what I mean? I am where I am. But just as a mechanism to give myself something to cling to, I decided that I can't do anything about it. So for the next 20 years, I'm just going to develop as much capability and experience as I possibly can. And then when I hit 40, assuming that that's going some way in the right direction, I'm going to spend the next 20 years, doing something meaningful with my existence. Then after that, I'd really love to take that and expand it out around the world. And if things were going, particularly well, then, for the last 20 years, my 100-year plan, I'd like to build something that really left a legacy for other people. And, all of those experiences that we talk about, like early on in my life, a lot of that came from, I didn't have a choice. As I started to get a little bit older, a lot of it was just driven by the fact that, for the rest, I do not expect life to get easier. my absolute expectation was that, like, and I feel like this is a bit of a challenge in society today. Like, life doesn't get easier. Like, for some reason there is a something where people are being sold this idea that there's some sort of nirvana that we all reach, and the land of milk and honey, and there's a few unicorns flying around. The fact is, for me, it was like, life gets harder, and our response to that is critical. Like, I don't want life to be easier. I want to get stronger, and I want my ability I want to be more capable and more able. And so all of these things were really just a mechanism for me to test my own ability to function when demanded. And after that, I decided that, right, that's not necessarily, that was more torture than training. But I did then take up kickboxing as a way to continually test and develop myself. So I've reached a decent level in that, and continuing that, because I find that's a very, very powerful way to keep you very focused, very measured, make sure you stay fit and healthy, and give you a real sense of how you test yourself on an ongoing basis in what I call a live fire environment. But it's all been about, just building capability, measurement, and benchmarking yourself so that you can move forward.
And you really have nailed fight or flight, right? Kickboxing and running, those two things together. It's like you've got plenty of choice when something scary happens, haven't you?
I do. I decided I'm probably better standing and fighting than I am running.
Josh, any last questions from you?
No, I don't think necessarily questions. I think it's been super interesting, and Dan, I could probably sit and listen to you talk about this stuff all day. I love the bit that life's not going to get easier. There's another guy called Alex Mosey, the CEO of acquisition.com, and he says something similar in, like, shit's hard, when's coming to save you. And kind of when you live in that mindset is when you can start to really materialize gains. I think, like, the kind of output from this conversation is we've got a framework. I guess people though can buy the book that you just talked about as well and get access to stuff. And I guess, like, my personal takeaways from this is, like, build confidence into your people, prove things to yourself first, train through the right repetitions, and kind of optimize as quickly as you can into failure points. But yeah.
Could I add one thing to that? Just because everything you just said, Josh, like 100%. But I think the biggest thing, like, in any capacity, was meet people where they are. Like, it's so easy. Like, if you listen to all this, like, just as an example, all the motivational stuff, right? Like, one of the reasons I ended up sort of just putting it all down in book form was I think there's a lot of extremes out there, but it's meeting people where they are. Like, you might have developed this really kind of, like, hardcore mental state, get it done. But that doesn't mean that everyone around you has. And it also doesn't mean that people are capable of building their own levels of resilience. But part of what you said, Owen, at the start, about bringing leaders and people who, are able to manage themselves first, so lead yourself first, is that ability to meet people where they are and, like, understand human emotion and connection, the fact that people do things in different ways at different times. And I just think it's in sales particularly, if you think about dealing with staff, customers, whoever, like, it's all about human dynamics and, connecting with people and meeting people where they are, building relationships, and then driving outcomes from that. And I just feel like we have to apply that same logic that makes successful salespeople so successful to families, teams, communities, just how we engage with other human beings, because it's just really important. Good relationships are not just for the boardroom,
Love that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. Look, really, really great conversation. I expected to learn and take a lot from it, and of course I have. Fascinating story, and good on you for putting it into a book as well, so we can all take learnings from your. I was going to say wonderful experiences, but there's some really challenging experiences and some wonderful ones as well. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I guess if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
There's my if you can probably
We'll cut that bit out.
It had to happen at some point. It's just to be honest, the best thing is just like hit me on LinkedIn and just message me on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn and I'll respond to you from there.
Thanks, Dan. We really appreciate your time. Josh, thanks as always. Have a good day, both of you, and thanks very much.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers, guys.